Survey methods. Tips for making online questionnaires. Why use surveys? Surveys allow for the gathering of large amounts of information, and they are very quick to set up. Surveys go beyond the limits of behavioral observation, since you can ask and measure people's beliefs, intentions, traits, and attitudes. Surveys can be performed online, which thus facilitates global research and is not limited to certain nation-state boundaries. Also, data collection is easy since information is already in a digital format. Surveys, however, have limitations that include the presence of biases like social desirability. It relies on participants to tell the truth and be honest. Participants have memory errors and limits to insight. Self-reports are susceptible to biases and heuristics, thus this needs to be accounted for. Also, questions should remove any moralizing or leading questions which may affect the way a participant responds. Types of research include individual differences that measure personality traits, attitudes, which measure certain beliefs about something, and finally ability, which includes tests of intelligence or performance. Other things to consider include ethics, since the survey, like all research methods, need to be valid and reliable. This includes ensuring equal opportunities and minimizing cultural biases in questions, since some concepts don't translate well into other cultures or languages, which can thus bias results. Question formats include open formats, which are questions that require participants to write without any predetermined response sets. The advantage of the open format is that it might find out things that the researcher hasn't considered before, but a disadvantage is that this form of data is hard to code, analyze, and researchers often end up with many pages of text. The closed format consists of statements or short questions followed by numbers of options. Advantages of this include numeric scores that have limited options, but a disadvantage includes that researchers are not going to find out anything new about the participants. Most surveys mix both these methods by having closed format as the bulk of the questionnaires, and then having open formats at the end to write about how participants find the study, so the feedback for the survey. Writing questions depends largely on previous research and measures of the theoretical literature, and what experts in the area have suggested about items. Colleagues can help to create more items. Questions need to be unambiguous, clear, and concise. This includes avoiding double-barreled and leading questions, which frame questions to bias participants to respond in a certain way. Basically, you don't want to guide people to engage in a certain response. Reverse wording can be used to identify participants who may not be taking the survey seriously and remove solely having either positive or negativity biases. An example of reserve wordings include, I will be happy with second place if that meant my friends got first place. Instructions are given to guide how to answer survey questions, and it can help emphasize what is important, like, for example, read statements carefully or read statements quickly, etc., etc. Response formats. These include numeric scales, dichotomous scales, and the frequency of behaviors. Numerical scales include having statements and participants respond in the form of a numeric score. For example, participants rank whether something is not at all like me or very much like me. A Likert scale is an example of a numerical scale. Dichotomous scales. These are opposite binary answers that force participants to make a decision with no in-between, no gray area. This also means that we don't really know the strength of their position. Frequency of behavior are response formats in which it measures the amount of behavior happening on average in a certain defined period of time. So, for example, at least once a day, week, month, etc. Surveys and any other research formats need to abide by the classical theory of error in measurement, in which observed error equals true score plus error. Basically, remember that any form of objective measurement is prone to error and biases. We desire all items to correlate with the true score as much as possible. We desire tests to be reliable, pertaining to the average correlation between items and test length. Reliability is defined as whether the test measures the same underlying concept consistently and over a stable period of time when it is administered. There is internal reliability, which is where all questions within a survey measure the same thing. Basically, we don't want random questions. We also want to consider how well does the test measure the same thing. Internal reliability can be tested via using split half, where participants completing the questions are split into two groups. Parallel forms test internal reliability by randomly dividing items to two separate items and administering these tests to the same participant. The advantage of this is that you get two versions of the same test and it controls for individual differences, since this is within subjects, not having to worry about practice effects as the tests are different. The disadvantage with this is that it requires large question item generation. The mathematical equivalent of averaging all possible split half combinations is Cronbach's alpha. Greater than 0.7 is favored, indicating acceptable internal reliability. Kuder-Richardson Formula 20, KR20, is similar to Cronbach's alpha, but this is used for dichotomous response formats. External reliability depends on whether the test will measure the same thing consistently in similar outside conditions by similar criteria. Test-retest reliability is the stability of the test over time, whereby participants complete a test twice, but the second time is in another occasion. Similar scores are desired, and the correlation coefficient between the two sets of responses is the test-retest reliability. This is, however, susceptible to the problem of practice. Inter-rater reliability is the agreement between raters and depends on how well they rate the same thing, whether they follow the criteria. Cohen's kappa is when there is a large number that indicates better reliability when there are two raters used, while Fleece kappa is when a fixed number of raters are used. Validity is the extent that item measures what you intend for it to be measuring. There are different types of validity, including faith validity. It's defined as believing in validity of instruments without objective data. There is content validity, which is the extent of measure representing all aspects of phenomenon of interest. There is construct validity, which involves established relationships with theoretical constructs and measurement. There is convergent validity, which is when the construct is expected to correlate with constructs similar to it, while discriminant validity expects the construct to not relate with unrelated constructs. Predictive validity are where